What if you turn hardship into greatness, anger into serenity? Everything changes. Make your life a masterpiece. Welcome, I'm Yanik, your host, and now joining me, Steve Schlam. Steve Schlam is the author of The Harvesting of Haystacks, Kane. Have you ever wondered what it is like to write a literally fiction, and what it entails to actually start writing a book, especially over almost a decade, and how to actually put it together in a successful and meaningful way? This and so much more now. Welcome, Steve Schlam, to the show. It's such an honor to have you and to discuss your newly published book, The Harvesting of Haystacks, Kane, published by 8 House Publishing in 2020.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you very much for the kind words. I'm happy to be here. Let's get started.
To start with, who is Steve Schlam in simply one powerful sentence?
That's a fair question. I'm a native New Yorker. I've lived in many different places in the United States and for a time in Mexico, where I met my current wife. I've had a kind of a peripatetic and checkered work history. I was an attorney. I was in business. I've been an actor. It's not been a great big career, but I've had my moments. I'm not Brad Pitt, but I like to think I'm as good looking as he is. And I have been a writer for many years now. And The Harvesting of Haystacks, Kane, which is the novel we're going to discuss today, is my debut novel. It's a novel that came out when I was 78 years old. I didn't write it when I was 78, but when the writing and the editing and the selling and the marketing and all that good stuff was finished, I was 78, and I was able to see my work finally introduced to the world at that point, and it was a lovely, lovely moment indeed. Um, and um, and so my novel has been long listed for 2 international prizes: the Bath Novel Award in 1924 and the Disquiet International Prize for Fiction in the same year. It is serious literary fiction, um, very much language focused, lyrical, I hope. Um, it's poetry. If I could write poetry or music, which I've never been able to do to my own satisfaction, I wouldn't have been a novelist. But I think that the novel form is as susceptible to poetry as any poetry or music is.
What do you think was it in your childhood that made you go through the process of becoming a writer? As you touched on, you were first an attorney. So what brought you first and foremost of becoming an attorney and then switching in your mid life, right? And
Well,
changing gears?
I was, it was the 60s when I started all of this. I didn't write the book in the 60s, but it was the 60s when I became kind of conscious. Uh, the 60s was a wonderful, chaotic, beautiful time I don't think we'll ever see again. And it prompted many people to look for alternative pathways to living, is the way I would put it. Um, I grew up in what I would call a straight environment, meaning a very conventional home, in which I was encouraged to become I was a in caps, nice Jewish boy in the city of New York, and I was encouraged to be a in caps professional man. Um, and so I did. I didn't really know any better. The '60s were kind of just dawning, and I plunged into them, and found myself a law school graduate working part time as a lawyer, which is not a job you get ordinarily. It's usually a more than full time job, but I got it, and nonetheless, I was an unhappy lawyer, as so many artists are. That is to say, artists who later on leave the law, like Kafka, like Balzac. Matisse, I believe, was a lawyer as well, um, and I had always been told, "Kid, you got a good mouth. You know, you got a good mouth. You have a way with words." And I had read voraciously from the time I was a small child. I used to read 3, 4 books at the age of 6, 8, 10. I used to read 3, 4 books a week. Not a week, but within a couple of weeks, I'd get them done, and I had the urge to express myself. I used to sing rock and roll, and when I was in college, I sang rock and roll with a band. Um, and you know, the impulse to create, the impulse to be expressive, was always in me, and so I started to write. Um, I fooled around with it really, and I discovered I liked it. First thing I ever wrote actually was a review of a band called Hot Tuna, which contained the remnants of the Jefferson Airplane or Starship or wherever they were traveling at that moment. Um, and it was a terrible review, and it never went anywhere, and wasn't really meant to. But it struck a match, and the match stayed lit. And so I wound up making my way into the then newly minted creative writing program in at City College in the city of New York, and found myself in the literary world, again in caps, amongst writers like Adrian Rich, the poet, Fred Tutton, the novelist, Mark Mirsky, who is also a novelist and the founder of the very, very well respected literary journal Fiction, and Joseph Heller, who wrote Catch 22 and became my mentor. And Joe was very, very kind to me, and he was to everybody. He was a very down to earth person who never traded on his celebrity. Um, and so he encouraged me, urged me to. I was writing short stories at the time, just kind of mucking around, trying to find my footing as a writer. And he very much encouraged me to find a subject. He used to tell me that find a subject that's commensurate with um, the high toned, elevated writing style you have. He once told me, he once told me I wrote better than he did. I think my jaw must have dropped to my ankles. I didn't know what I'm not even sure I ever said thank you, you know. And so, you know, that advice stayed with me, and I was amongst other people younger than me, some older than me, um, who 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 felt that they had something to say, something that was pushing to come out from inside, and they had the determination and the passion to say it. And so, it kind of it was a kind of I don't know exactly how to term it, a kind of an internal parameter shift that where I saw that this was a pathway to a kind of freedom I was never going to achieve by putting on my suit and tie and picking up my attaché case and trotting off to work. Um, it wasn't happening, and I knew that it wasn't going to happen. And so I continued to write. I was still being allowed to work part time, and so I was able to budget my time better than most people, most writers who like me had to make a living. I was willing to take less in order to have time. because time is freedom. And I traded the opportunity to make more money for the time to be free and pursue things that were going to touch my heart and my soul, and not and nourish those. If not my pocketbook, let's put it that way. Believe me, it didn't nourish my pocketbook. But anyway, um, and so when I after I finished the program, I continued to write short stories, and then um, all of a sudden, really all of a sudden, I woke up one night. I had had a dream. There was a very large man in my dream, a fat man. Um, and I actually, the first thing I remember of that dream was the what became the last line of my book, which is spoken in my book by an African American lady of the evening, a streetwalker. And she says, "Y'all don't know what it's like to have all that inside you." And I heard that. And then all of a sudden, I was literally besieged by other voices uh, uh, chattering at me, clamoring at me, and all of them demanding to be heard, all of them wanting to express whatever it was they had inside them, and there was plenty. And so I thought at first, gee, I finally I've finally fallen over the edge, and I'm in Crazyville, and the men with the white coats and the butterfly nets are going to come and take me away to some place where I can get the rest that I need. Um, but then I realized that it was characters talking to me, and it suggested those characters suggested um, uh, that it suggested to me that the structure of the novel would be um, choral or contrapuntal, in which um, uh, a monologue of sorts, a rumination of sorts from that fat man who I knew was going to be my central character, would be juxtaposed against a monologue uh, from one of these characters who 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 would be either literally in the same space with my character, or in his consciousness. That is to say, it all could have been memories. Um, and of course, those are structural things that had to be determined as time went on, and they were. Um, and so I know I'm giving you a very, very long answer. So let me stop here for the moment, and go ahead and pick up from wherever you need to pick up, Yanik.
Beautiful. Walk us through a little bit how the training as a lawyer has equipped you to write such a thorough literary fiction, because it almost seems like you are living through the persona that you are describing so beautiful with Haystacks Kane, right? So walk us through how the training as a lawyer has helped you to prepare of becoming such a profound and challenging writer.
That's an interesting question, actually. My quick answer is that my training as a lawyer didn't prepare me at all. In fact, it it inhibited the creative impulse. But that's not strictly true, because I was a lot of the work I did as an attorney was appellate work. I would we would someone, a client, would want to appeal a decision that a court had handed down, and my firm would take the case, and I would be assigned to write the appeal. And of course, that isn't creative work that comes from deep in one's soul, from deep in one's subconscious, as 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 I think all artistic work comes from, be it painting or poetry, music or writing, or prose, I should say. It doesn't matter, but it did involve um, the use of one's internal creative tools, if I can put it that way. So in that sense, and also one good thing about being a lawyer, one of the few as far as I'm concerned, is that it teaches you, whether you want to or not, to be highly organized. Because if you're not, if you cannot put together the elements of the case or part of the case that you're working on, you're lost. You're swimming in a chaotic sea in which you will not survive. Um, and so I was able, when I became a writer, when I started to write in earnest, I was able to utilize that ability to organize, to take, like I said, for example, all these disparate voices, and begin to, how shall I say, position them in such a way that they related to one another, or in most cases through the central voice, central character, which is a Herschel Kane, who becomes Haystacks Kane, a 607-pound professional wrestler and a devoted butterfly collector. Um, so that's, in that sense, there is some um, there is some mashup between being a lawyer, having certain skills that the practice of law demands, and being able at the same time to create fiction and prose narratives.
Before we go back specifically to the book, how did your environment, let's say family and friends, react when you decided to actually only be a part-time attorney?
That's what, yeah. Um, well, actually, my parents had passed by that. No, that's not true. Actually, that's funny. I should say that. Today is actually the anniversary of my mother's birth. It's her birthday today, and she passed many years ago. But um, I think, well, my dad died when I was 15. I don't have brothers and sisters. Um, so I did have a wife in those days, my first wife. Um, she is a painter. She's actually got a few art books that are that sell, and she's got paintings in a couple of museums and so on. And so she too was an artist, and she was, of course, all for my venturing out on the artistic seas um, as well. She was a wonderful support to me. Um, we're not married anymore, but we're friends. And My mother, I think, if I told my mother, I want to climb Mount Everest, she would have said, "Go for it." So, I and friends. I mean, friends are friends. Most friends won't tell you, I think, what they think you shouldn't do. Some will. Those friends are usually your best friends, it seems to me. Um, but everybody was in favor. Everybody was supportive. Whether they thought I was crazy, whether they thought I would never succeed, I really don't know. But that is not the feedback I got from
What made you start the story in the hospital bed?
Say it again, Yanik. I'm sorry.
What made you start the story in the hospital? What was
Yes.
it?
Yes. Um, when all those voices came at me, I spent that entire evening from because I woke up with a start after midnight, and I spent the next 4 or 5 hours until I could see, daylight filtering into the room, um, frantically jotting everything down, and then having to make a decision whether I would just keep writing and never go back to work again. That's a different part of the story. Um, but um, uh, I knew that this very large fat man, um, I knew that he was in a passive state, in distress. I knew that. I mean, it's, let me say, it's very difficult to pinpoint, the every moment of the process that you undergo to create any kind of artistic work. So I think I'm approximating, but as best as I can. You asked me the question, I'm trying to give you the answer. Um, I knew he was in a passive state, and I knew he was in distress, and I saw, I think, if not in those first moments, but shortly afterward, that he was struggling, and it was a struggle. I hate to use a cliche, but it was a life and death struggle, and that, um, if I remember correctly, that suggested to me that somebody who's in a passive state, immobile, in distress, um, might very well be in a hospital room, and that decision, that became my decision, that he was in a hospital room, that he was immobilized, that he couldn't speak, that he had a spaghetti coming out of him, wires and tubes and all kinds of stuff. Um, that he would then that gave me structurally, that gave me the opportunity to utilize all the voices that I was talking about before, that had accompanied him in my dream, as as I said, uh, uh, in a point counterpoint kind of way, um, like in like as though it were call and response, which is a choral pattern you find particularly in the black church, um, and so whatever he would say, um, would be met later on by a countervailing monologue or rumination by one of the other characters, and in that sense, it becomes a kind of, I hate to be over intellectualized as too much, but it becomes a kind of a dialectical process in order to determine what the truth is, and that is his search. What is the truth of his own existence? Where has he really come from, and what have the events that he has come from done to make him who he is? uh, which can tell him who he is, really who he is, and what he might have to do to become what he wants to be, that isn't who he is right now. And so, yeah, so again, that structurally, the idea of all those voices, um, um, not the idea, but the presence of all those voices, um, the, the, I was able to utilize all those voices in a way that made sense in the context of the structure of the narrative.
How did you feel when all this happened to you? When you had this really this stream of consciousness flowing at you, and you decided to really write everything down for almost 4 hours and more until daylight?
It was, well, I mean, it was two things. It was nerve wracking because I was afraid I wasn't gonna be able to capture uh, enough of it. Um, but um, on the other hand, it was thrilling. I mean, and that's true. That experience, the experience of the thrill of writing, and the work, the drudgery, the pain of trying to get words to come out in the right way, to get the right words to come out in the right way, and so you can put them down, which is often a process, because you're not always fertile, you're not always fecund, as they say, as my literary hero William Faulkner would say. Um, you're not always able to just pull it out of your arm, you know. Um, Sometimes it's just dribs and drabs and a blank white page, and you could pull your hair out of your head. But I mean, that's what you sign up for. You cannot control the process. You can try, and must always try, to keep your channels, your pathways into your own subconscious which is where I believe creativity lives, open. Because when they're not open, in my experience, when they're not open, you're dry. And you then have to be conscious, and consciousness kills art. Um, and so I was, as I said, I was frightened because I wasn't sure I was going to be able to capture all of it, and I was thrilled because it just came pouring out of me, and and again that process recurred over and over and over again during the writing of the book. When it was good, when it was good, it just flowed out of my arm. Okay. It was like I was sitting there watching myself write the book. I wasn't writing, my arm was writing the book. And I could just sit there and idly, scan the room or look out the window or daydream, and my arm would keep writing the book. It was wonderful. And to tell you a secret that many writers will probably tell you if you push them, it was better than love. It was better than food. It was better than sex. It was better than anything because it you are at once lost yourself and became very much perhaps the most yourself you had ever been.
This is really, really powerful. What held you back not pursuing your writing career at this moment? What was it, do you
You
think,
mean at the
that
initial moment?
held? Yes, because you alluded to it, you said you were thinking potentially just going all in or still keep working as an attorney.
Yeah, okay, okay, I understand. um well, that was that the answer here is simple. um i i I simply did not have the courage to kick over the traces, as they say, and 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 uh, and venture out into the forest of the unknown. Leave and leave all my ties to the straight world of getting and spending. I just didn't have the courage to do it. Um, I wanted to do it, but then everybody carries within them a kind of a conscience, a kind of a Jiminy Cricket from Pinocchio, um, who sits on your shoulder and says, "You shouldn't do that," or "Go ahead, do that." And so um, mine told me that, I'm fancying it up. I mean, I knew that I had a job. I was making some money. I was part time, so I wasn't making a hell of a lot of money. But it was in those days. It wasn't like it is now. Things weren't as expensive, and I was young, and so was my wife, and we could live on less and still travel and do all kinds of stuff. Um, um, but nevertheless, I knew I had to eat, I had to pay the rent, I had to pay the other bills, and my wife was all for eating and having a place to live, and so that was a kind of a, I think, in retrospect, a rationalization for not making the decision, the, co- the decision that courage would have impelled me to make, which was to simply say, "I'm not going back to work anymore. I'm going to sit here and in this small foyer and on the top floor of a rent controlled building in New York, right under the roof in the middle of the summer with no air conditioning there, and so on and so on." And if they've ever been in New York in the summer, hazy, hot, and humid is an understatement. Um, but I again, it just I didn't have the courage, and so I didn't do it. And it took me several years to write the novel. Um, Doing it, I had more time than many writers, believe me. But I had other things in my life I had to deal with, and so on. And so, um, yeah, and that's really the story.
What did this period of your life really teach you when you look back?
What does it teach me? Is that what you're asking?
What did it really, yes, what did it teach you? Keep working as an attorney while writing the book. It's a huge task still. So
Yeah.
what do you look back that you say, wow, actually it was probably one of the best times of my life?
Um, well, it was there were other things going on in my life that aren't really germane here, but um, it was in the sense that I knew that I had a novel and I had a direction. The direction was vague. The shape was I had some sense of the shape of the whole, and so on. Nonetheless, I knew I had many steps to climb before I got to the top, and finished it. Um, so it I mean to some extent, I have regret that I didn't simply just keep writing, and not go back to work ever again. Um, I don't think there were. I don't really think that I got much. I don't think I got much benefit at all from continuing to be a lawyer, apart from the fact that my security needs were met, and that is not insignificant because I mean, the classic image of the artist is a painter living in a garret in Paris, and scrounging for loaves of or loaves not loaves but pieces of stale bread to eat. Um, and I wasn't I really wasn't prepared to do that. Maybe I was too soft. Uh, it's quite possible, but I wasn't prepared, whatever the reason. Um, and so the, the the fact that my security needs it's a trade and a balance. I traded some portion of my freedom for security. I think that's a trade many people, not just artists of one sort or another, make. Um, some people have the fortitude, again, the courage to just strike out and follow the muse wherever the muse takes them, and they're willing to suffer whatever sufferable consequences ensue. Um, and others don't. I think probably most don't. I'm not sure which group is more successful. We'd have to really delve into specific examples, and the survey wouldn't be scientific in any way, shape, or form. But it was what it was. I was extremely happy that I had this thing to do, whether I was doing it perfectly in the way that one might imagine. Doing it in the ideal way that you might imagine to do it. I was still very happy because I knew I had found something meaningful. In the '60s, there was a concept that was in currency, and the concept was termed meaningful work. We were all looking for meaningful work, and that's a good thing to look for because you know Freud said that the three main elements of one's life are work, love, and play. And if you divide them up, I don't know how you divide up the percentages, but to make it simple, if it's a third, a third, a third, work becomes one third of your life. And if that's a misery for you, you know, you're. I mean, you've already. I mean, the most you can get is a 67, and a 67 in my schooling is a D or a C plus, or sorry, C minus, and you don't want that. You want to shoot for an A. So
Yeah, that's fantastic. I think what you really demonstrate is that you gotta make your decision right, right? That's what Alan Langer said, right? No matter what you choose, you have to make it right. And I think you're a great example of this. Really, it illustrates that we should not too much worry, about our decisions, but ultimately we should take it and ultimately make it right. How much biographical is the harvesting of Haystacks, Kane? Because I really feel it's a profound human story that everyone can really relate to.
I thank you for that. I agree with you, and I hope your listeners and anyone else who comes across my novel will feel the same way. Um, I do think that there is, even though the circumstances, the characters is a kind of an odd duck who doesn't fit into any particular conventional category, obviously, and his background, of course, is unique. the work he does is unique, and so on. Nonetheless, I think that the connections. I mean, that I think the struggle that he goes through, um, the kinds of experiences that he has, are struggles and experiences that many people, most people, can relate to. Um, I I if you're asking me, which I think you are asking me, is how much of me is in the character. Um, of course, the I will tell you this. There's my wife now and my ex-wife were both painters, and uh, uh, the the, the my ex-wife's teacher, whose name was Norman Rabin, is the son of the great Yiddish writer Shalom Aleichem, used to say to them in class that um, every work of art is a self-portrait. Um, it's not done consciously, or sometimes it is, but mostly it isn't. But it's inevitable that one's life, one's history, one's attitudes, one's feelings, one's background, other people that one has known, and so on, are going to seep in to whatever narrative you're creating. And so, of course, um, my character is from Brooklyn. So am I. Um, there are certain uh, he's Jewish, so am I. Um, there are certain incidents that occur to him while he's a kid um, that actually occurred to me. And here I'm not going to tell you which ones they are because I don't think it matters. Um, but of course those things are there. And the, I mean, he has a sister. I never had a sister. His father abandons him early on uh, when he's about 12. My father didn't abandon me, but of course he did die when I was young, but older than that, and so on. My mother wasn't hit by a car and killed. His is. So, and yet, I mean, I'll tell you one thing, and that is my grandmother was my mother's mother. I have family on the mind today because it's my mother's birthday. Um, my grandmother was hit by a car and killed, uh, and so maybe unconsciously, it wasn't a conscious decision, but maybe unconsciously, I I kind of I kind of transplanted that onto Herschel's mother. Um, I mean, in terms of what I will call verisimilitude, um, my descriptions, my characterizations of various people um, they're not, I'm not writing biographies of anybody, um, uh, not at all. But uh, um, they are, they are true in the sense that they reflect um, observations I've made of people, all these different people, and that includes the wrestlers that I talk about um, in the novel. The other wrestlers, I should say. Yeah.
What made you tell the story of high stake Kane, that he saw always the good, and he also was aware, even though he wanted to win, but most by and large he lost.
Yeah.
What is it?
So Herschel Kane, who becomes the wrestler Haystacks Kane, is a true innocent. He doesn't give a damn about fame and fortune. He sees good everywhere he goes. He knows he allows himself to be exploited because to him, in a sense, it's not being exploited. He doesn't take offense at it. He becomes a wrestler, for example, mostly because his manager, Maury Holman, I guess, um, who is really a despicable human being in many ways, um, promises him that he will have the opportunity to travel. He'll get it. He really Maury talks that up to him. You'll get a chance to see you all over the country and people are going to love you and all this stuff. And yes, he would like to be loved. Yes, he wanted that. But he also thought to himself, if he gets a chance to travel all over the country and he'll be able to see the different butterfly species that populate those different areas of the country, and he'll be able to see things he wouldn't see, places and people he wouldn't ordinarily get a chance to meet or see. And so he didn't think to himself, "Here's my way to make my way to the top. Here's my way, to line my pocket with gold." He never thinks that. He's Because what he's looking for is not gold, but golden moments.
Beautiful. And really, we come back what you mentioned earlier, right? In order to find oneself, we have to lose oneself, right? It's really profound, and really, it goes really across the story, really, that you tell about, in The Harvesting of Haystacks, Kane, published by Eight House Publishing. Beautiful book. So, right now, if you are listening, go on steveschlam.com, or also get a copy on Amazon and all the major bookstores, obviously, across the country. Really, I'm curious, what is it like to be Steve Schlam? Do you also look through your lens, and do you see also more the good than the bad in your life?
I'm sorry, I missed a piece of that, Yanik. If you could repeat it, I would appreciate it.
Steve Schlam, is he also someone who sees the good in everything?
Yeah. Well, the answer there, I suppose, is yes, but the more accurate answer is yes and no. Um, I, um, my wife always upbraids me for not seeing enough good in people. Um, and I don't know, perhaps she's correct. Um, but I like to think about myself that I always I come to everybody without a preconceived agenda or notice. I mean, it's different if you're doing something that's business related and you know you need something or want something, and or have a complaint or something like that. That's different. But I'm talking about in what I would call pure social interaction. I I I, I come to everybody, and I'm expecting that they're going to be good, and I'm going to be good, and they're going to be nice, and I'm going to be nice, and we're going to be friendly, and all that kind of stuff. So in that sense, I would say I do see the good in everybody. Um, of course, I'm also if that expectation turns out not to be true, then um, um, I can flip the script is the phrase in my mind, um, and revert to a darker point of view about the person, and so maybe my sense, that's why I say it's yes and no. My sense of good is always tempered by experience enough experience of people who aren't good to make me hold a pure endorsement, um, hold back from a pure endorsement.
You have alluded to that, not just in your life, but also for Haystacks Kane, that life and death are somehow complementary. Is Haystacks Kane afraid of death? And also, is Steve Schlam afraid of death?
Yeah. Well, he says, um, um, in several places in the novel, but I'm not afraid of death. He always pauses before he says the word death, but I'm not afraid of death, or don't think I am anyway. And that's a kind of an ambiguous response to that, or not a response, but an ambiguous concept uh, of that issue. Um, because he thinks he's not afraid, but he's not sure. And in my own case, I just turned 80 years old, as you mentioned at the top of the show. Um, I've outlived my parents and a lot of other people I know. Um, and given my own health situation, I've done a very, very good job. And I used to think I wouldn't make it to past 70. Most of the people in my family never did. Um, and now I'm 80, and I'm heading toward 90. Um, am I afraid? I think if you allow yourself, if you allow that fear to become a part of your conscious mind, um, you're doomed. You can never, you'll never be able to do anything, especially anything that involves even the slightest degree of risk, as much of life actually does. Um, and so, yeah, I know I'm my age. I know that people my age pass on, but it's not something that uh, is a kind of a current concern. Just about ever, you know. I don't. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, uh, my fears are more localized. You know, gee, I have this podcast with Yanik, gee, I hope I do a good job. You know, that type of thing. But 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 not this overwhelmed this kind of overwhelming issue that, of course, dying is. Um, so I think I try to deal with. I have to do this. I have to do that. Gee, I'd like to go here. I want to travel there, and so on and so on. And that attitude kind of bespeaks um, an idea that life is going to go on indefinitely, and that will be okay with me.
Beautiful. You also talk about dreams, especially when it came to actually writing the book. What do dreams mean to you? Do they have some true significance? And do you think there is a window potentially to something that is beyond our consciousness?
Mm. You cut in and out on me, and I didn't hear a lot of it, so I apologize. But if you can say it again, I would appreciate it.
Do you think, what do dreams mean to you? Do you think there is something beyond our consciousness? That there is something we can access, and potentially even that there is something afterlife? How do you make sense of you writing such a beautiful novel, and which was really by and large inspired by dreams, right? So I'm curious how you relate to dreams and potentially to also a life after death.
Yeah. Well, let me divide that into two sections. Um, I don't know whether I believe in life after death. It's not something I spend a lot of time thinking about. I figure whatever's going to be is going to be, and I don't have a hell of a lot of control over it. Um, I mean, if you push me, I'll tell you. I think that 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 when it ends, it ends. There isn't anything else. Um, But if I had to swear on a stack of Bibles or make a big bet on it, I wouldn't, because I don't know, and neither does anybody else, and I'm not in a hurry to find out. Okay, so that's one part of it. The other part is something that I do think about, and is part of my writing process, or is a goal of my writing process, and that is that I once wrote a short story a long, long time ago, and I called it, There is a World Beyond the World We See with Our Eyes. And that is something I deeply, deeply believe in, because I've had enough experiences, not that many, but enough. Um, I used to live in the Southwest. I lived in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and um, I, 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 we took a trip to Sedona, Arizona, which is full of energy vortexes and all kinds of spirituality. Some of it real, some of it not. Um, and I had a vision, and I'm a skeptic. I was a skeptic of things like this, and I had a vision. I'm telescoping this because it's we don't have a tremendous amount of time, I know, but I had a vision of a warrior, a Native American warrior clearly wearing bracelets and fur lined bracelets and anklets, and carrying some type of a stick with feathers and perhaps bells. I don't remember anymore. Uh, who danced in front of me in Boynton Canyon in Sedona, which is one of the 7 energy vortexes there. I've had some other Native American experiences in the Southwest, and these are experiences that are not um, explicable unless you make the argument that the person having that experience is crazy in some way or other, emotionally or mentally disturbed, which of course, hey, it's possible. Um, um, these are not experiences that are explicable in conventional terms. They're just simply not. Um, and I know that in my writing, which is what I started talking about, I believe that language itself is a pathway to transcendence. Um, and so I try in my writing to take the reader on writing itself, language itself, style itself is very, very important to me. It was a constant element of everything I did in writing this book. And I would read the book aloud, either to anybody I could commandeer to listen to it, or to myself, because I felt and feel that language is music. It's lyric. It's music at its core, and that what I wanted to do in the book, and always want to do really, is to take the reader on a journey on what I will call the river of words, to um, that place beyond their literal meanings, where that's the place that poetry and music take you when you give yourself up to it. And that place is a place of transcendence. It's a place that allows us that we can reach via any kind of peak experience: drugs, sex, rock and roll, jazz, classical music, you name it, nature, of course. Um, that will allow us to, in the words of Richard Alpert, the, the the psychologist at Harvard, who with Tim Leary um, took a lot of acid and became Baba Ram Dass. Um, that experience will allow you to be here now at last, and that, to me, is the goal. That's the paramount goal. It's the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. Am I there? You might ask me. Have I done it? In moments, only in moments. But and those moments were enough to convince me that that's where I should be going or trying to get to in any event, and maybe so should everybody else.
How did you feel once you finally submitted your book for publishing?
Yeah. Um, it took me a long time. It was a long and winding road, as Paul McCartney once said. Um, and But I finally found a publisher who saw something in the work and in me, I suppose, and was willing to publish it. And when we worked on editing it, he helped. I mostly did it. I did most of it, but he helped. Um, and when it was finished and ready to be set in galleys and published, and really, when the book came out, when I saw we worked on picking a cover. When I saw the cover, when I saw my picture on the back. It was a feeling of relief and enormous vindication. I was proud. I felt like it was a victory. I felt like I had run a long race, a marathon, and managed to cross the finish line. Um, of course, I was at that point 78. Um, and so I knew at the same time that, the runway for future work is shorter than it was when I first started on this journey. Um, but that's okay. It still exists, and I can still do. There's still time to do other things. Um, so in no way did it feel um, that that publication at that age was somehow a last hurrah, a valedictory. No, no, not at all. It was a sweet, sweet moment.
Beautiful. What makes you truly feel alive?
Oh, well, lots of things. Um, art, nature, people, of course. Um, any even something like this, I feel, that our interaction, our dialogue is is empowering, inspiring. There's a to revert to the vernacular. There's a good vibe here. Um, even something like this, anytime I can make what I feel to be a meaningful connection with another human being, even if it's a small connection uh, that isn't going to last forever, kind of thing. Um, that that makes me feel alive. Um, and so, in that sense, I guess I'm just like my character. I too believe in golden moments.
Beautiful. Last question. What is it that you think will inspire a person to really read the book? What is the most and single most important reason to actually get a copy of the Harvesting of Haystacks Kane, published by 8 House Publishing?
Yeah,
So
and it's
what is the single most important reason for someone who is listening now to get a copy?
In other words, why should they run out and get a copy of the book at Amazon or their local bookstore or Barnes and Noble or wherever they are? Okay, um, I think that the journey that Haystacks Herschel goes on, the struggle that he engages in, is kind of imposed upon him, is a struggle for meaning, for an I, to discover the truth of his existence, as I said earlier, I think, and and to, to become whole, to become an authentic self, to shuck off the false identities that we all that are engrafted upon us from almost from birth, like costumes in a play, you know, and become who he really is and who he really is meant to be. And I think, I mean, this is not a self-help book, uh, but so I mean, I don't have prescriptions on how to do that. I'm not sure I know myself, but although I keep working on it. Um, but I think that to go on the journey with the character is to begin, at the very minimum, is to begin one's own journey, or at least to plant the seed that such a journey is possible and maybe ought to be embarked upon.
Steve Schlam, actor and writer. Thank you so much for being on the show and being truly a blessing to myself and really to the world. So to everyone who is now listening, really get a copy. We will put in the link here below and start reading the Harvesting of Haystacks, Kane. Thank you so much, Steve Schlam.
And thank you, Yanik. I much, much appreciated it. Thank you.
That's why knowledge matters. Make your life a masterpiece. Visit now programs.the-ykm.com. Meant to